Welcome to GoPowercat.com's Powercat Pregame Podcast, sponsored by Weddle & Sons Roofing. Now, here's Fitz.
Welcome to another edition of the Powercat Pregame Podcast, sponsored by Weddle & Sons Roofing. I am GoPowercat publisher Tim Fitzgerald, and it's time to get you set up for the game with the nickname I will not repeat. I'm going with the Abolition Bowl until I get something better than the other name that is out there. But this is a very interesting matchup. Going into the season, we would have thought this was a big-time matchup between two teams that'll be at least in the top 20, if not higher. And yet reality came to visit. K-State had a bad loss at BYU, but KU has really struggled so far this season. KU at 2-5 comes to Manhattan with maybe a rejuvenated sense of self after an off week and a win over Houston. What they've done this season has been a tragedy if you're a KU fan. They've led in the second half of every game and yet lost 5 of those, 4 of them after leading in the fourth quarter. That's almost unheard of. I've never seen anything quite like it. And it doesn't reflect the quality of this KU team under Lance Leipold. And I think they're beginning to settle in now. Jalen Daniels is back to running the ball a little bit. Maybe they're understanding what they want to do on offense under new coordinator Jeff Grimes a little bit better. But they're also going up against a Kansas State team that has been good about taking away opposing running games, although they did look a little shaky last week against a true running quarterback in Garrett Green. Interestingly enough, Garrett Green gave KU's defense a lot of problems himself. So we're looking at a game where running the ball will be center stage. They're both good at it. And they both have, in Avery Johnson and Jalen Daniels, true dual threat quarterbacks that can hurt you through the air or with their legs. Now, Daniels has struggled throwing the ball at times, and if he sees pressure, he doesn't really like it. He's thrown way too many interceptions for KU to function at a high level. And Avery Johnson seems to have gotten over his yips early in the season against some of that pressure, and he's learned incredible lessons and advanced himself remarkably so far in this season. Last week, West Virginia pledged itself to take away the running game of Kansas State. And Avery Johnson was a little bit dinged up and they didn't want to run him, and he never did. And he also never got hit because the line protected him so well. But then Avery went and did all his damage through the air, and it was massive damage to the Mountaineers, throwing for almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, even though K-State was a little bit conservative in their throwing game. They could have really torched West Virginia deep quite a bit. Will Kansas take that same gamble? Will they walk up to that line of scrimmage and say, okay, kid, beat us through the air. Our secondary is much better than West Virginia's. That's the truth. It is. So it will be fascinating to see how these two defenses approach some very explosive offenses. And of course, special teams always seems to visit in this game, usually in K-State's favor. So we'll see how it all works out. It's Kansas State and KU at 7 p.m. inside Bill Snyder Family Stadium. And now let's get us rolling here by bringing in the former Kansas State offensive lineman, the host of the Big 12 Insiders, and our GoPowercat football analyst, Mr. Brien Hanley. And there he is, Big B himself. Brien, I feel like we've done this a few times. Let's see, we've talked about this game on the Insiders, the normal Powercat podcast, now the pregame podcast. We even threw a Big 12 Insider segment in there, but the tables were reversed. You were asking the questions, which was kind of fun for me. So let's dig into this because this game has gained importance. It's one of the things that Lance Leipold has brought to the table for Kansas. This game feels basically as important to them now as it did to K-State for years. K-State won this game not only with talent, but it was blowouts quite often because it just meant more in that K-State locker room. Lance Leipold's found a way in Lawrence to up the value, even though there's not nearly as many Kansas kids on this roster. All of a sudden, this game is really competitive. It has been for a few years.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know a lot of Kansas fans believe that Missouri is their number one rival, and that's fine. But you don't play Missouri anymore.
Yep.
You know, you play Kansas State, and Kansas State has to be your number one rival. Look, rivalries are always good in sports, especially in football. Kansas needed one. Kansas State always looked at this game as, their biggest rival, because it is. And Kansas now is starting to look at it the same way. Look, we talked about it on the Big 12 Insiders. Is Kansas football, high school football, is better, in my opinion, than it's ever been.
Yep.
I'm not saying they have the best player ever, but as a collective whole, it's as good as it's ever been. And getting those guys to come to your campus and keeping them out of your rival's campus or other teams coming in to poach them is important. And winning this game is very, very important, and putting an emphasis on it. Kansas kids are going to put an emphasis on it. So I think it's important to win it. Kansas has put an emphasis on trying to do that. Kansas State has always had it there. But I mentioned this earlier, Fitz. I just think that it means – I shouldn't say it means more. I think Kansas is taking this game way more serious than they have previously because they're trying to derail Kansas State's season.
Right. And that's really where it starts. This was supposed to be, in heading into the season, a matchup of maybe top 20 teams. And as we all know, there's been some issues with KU so far that were completely unexpected, but they haven't been far off from winning in any of the games they've lost. In fact, they've kind of gone out of their way to lose games. It's been painful to watch, even for someone who doesn't cover the University of Kansas, because honestly, Brian, I've never really seen anything like it. To lose that many close games in the fourth quarter, it's insanity. So this team hasn't been far off, and they've taken a week off, and then they got that get well game with Houston that seemed to get them better. So now they come in with a better sense of self, I feel like, than they've had at any point this year. They know who they are, and they're oddly playing in a more familiar stadium than they have played in all season, which is kind of weird to say. But this is going to be a really good game between two talented teams. And set aside the records, it's cliche, but you really should this year. This is a talented KU team.
Absolutely. I've been saying it all year that Kansas was eventually going to get it figured out. They were going to get it figured out. Well, it took 6 weeks, but they finally got it figured out. And again, I don't want to confuse the Houston offense of being anything other than pathetic, because that's exactly what it is. They have no idea what they're doing at quarterback. And so Kansas took advantage of that. Yep. But I always say that's what you're supposed to do. When you take on teams that aren't as good as you, your job is to dominate them. Kansas did it. They had a week off. They prepared. It seems to me like they fixed some things. And they took advantage of it. I mean, they had 4 interceptions. Their defense had kind of let them down in all of these games, even though they had played well at times during those games. It was always at the end that the defense let them down. Well, they dominated this football game against Houston. Jalen Daniels got back on track. It's going to take a lot for Kansas to win, or Kansas State to win this football game. It really is, because Kansas is talented, they're well coached, and Kansas is hungry. They want to derail Kansas State's season. But on the flip side, Kansas State doesn't want this streak to end, and everything that they want to accomplish is in front of them for Kansas State. This is just one of those measuring sticks that they got to get past to keep going.
It's at 15 years and counting, an impressive winning streak for Kansas State. But let's start at quarterback. I did my daily delivery today on 2 incredible running backs from the state of Kansas. One from Junction City, one from Lawrence, starring for their teams, maybe the 2 best backs in the Big 12. There's pretty good ones at UCF and Tech and other places. And Ollie Gordon, I'm sorry, I'm leaving you out for right now. But the quarterbacks are the catalysts. They're the ones in charge. We've seen Avery Johnson really up his game as his learning curve is beginning to really pick up some pace now. He's looking like a complete quarterback. And as you mentioned, Jalen Daniels has gone through his yips this year. He's had a lot of interceptions, but he seems to be getting back to his dual threat self a little bit, maybe carving out a better identity of who he is as defined within this new KU offense. Compare these 2 quarterbacks.
Similar in dual threat, similar with maybe having some issues this year throwing the football, but both seem to be getting that together at kind of the same time, Fitz. We saw Avery Johnson do some stuff at Colorado. He won the game throwing the football. After they had run the ball down Colorado's throat, Colorado said, okay, enough's enough. You better throw it. Well, we did. And same thing happened at West Virginia. We tried to run it. West Virginia's like, nope, you're not going to run it. So then Avery Johnson said, okay, I'll just throw it over your head. I'll just throw it and beat you. And he did. Jalen Daniels is getting back to what he has been. Again, he had a lot of struggles, much more than what Avery Johnson did at the beginning of the football season. But he's starting to come around. I think these are two very, very talented quarterbacks on display, and both have good running games to support that. Yeah. But, yeah, both of these quarterbacks are really good.
Jalen Daniels doesn't seem to be as big of a running threat as he has been in the past. I think they're being careful with that back, and they should be. He's very important to them, just as Avery is to Kansas State. But containing that quarterback run game is going to be a key aspect of this game for both defenses. And honestly, Garrett Green exposed them both. And Green did it for a full game against Kansas, only had a half game against K-State before getting injured. But for me, this is kind of the focus of the game. Can you stop the quarterback run game from the opposition?
Yeah, for me, it's more so with Kansas State because, look, Kansas State stops the run. That's just what they do. They'll have their hands full with Devin Neal. Don't get me wrong. But I think if they play the way that they've played all year, they're going to be able to stop the run. Quarterback, look, you get an extra blocker, an extra person out there running the ball that you have to account for. That's why people love the quarterback run game. I don't know how much they're going to do it. I would suspect Kansas pulls out all the stops to beat Kansas State. So if the quarterback run game, the option game, we've seen Kansas do a lot of that. I think everything is going to be on the table for them. As far as Avery Johnson is concerned, you look at Kansas State running game last week where he just did not run the football, and the reason that they protected him, maybe he wasn't 100% healthy running. He'll be 100% in this game. Well, I shouldn't say 100%. He will be part of the offense running the football for Kansas State this weekend. And if you even look at it last week, a couple of those RPOs or those read options, if he pulls the ball and runs, he's running. He would have easily had 100 yards rushing in that game. They didn't even think about accounting for Avery Johnson last week, not even one time. So it'll be different this week. But Avery Johnson is clearly the better runner
here. Yeah, it will be interesting. But if you're Kansas, you probably try to take the same approach as West Virginia because the back end of your defense is better than West Virginia. They've got NFL level talent on the back end, and they probably feel like they can cover K-State's receivers in man, which puts them also in an interesting position with Avery Johnson running. If he finds a seam, well, you're in man and you're not facing the line of scrimmage. This is a weird balance that KU's got to carve out here of not ignoring the throwing game, not ignoring the running game, and trying to find that median that would stop Kansas State. We don't know if that even exists, but that's their charge.
Yeah, if I'm Kansas State, I run a lot of 11 personnel, which is one back, one tight end, get 3 wide receivers out there and see how KU wants to match up with that because you're right. The back end of KU's defense is their strength. What is not their strength and hasn't been is their linebacking core, especially with guys being injured. So if you're going to come out and try to stop the run and we're in 11 personnel and you don't try to match up with that and you just have your guys out there, first of all, their linebackers aren't going to be able to keep up with the slot receiver that we have. Second of all, then we can run the football when you have a light box of 6 guys. So it's really going to depend. I suspect Kansas State comes out in a lot in 3 and 4 wide receiver sets and see how Kansas wants to match up with that. You didn't see a ton of 4 wide receiver sets against West Virginia in running down situations. I think we're going to see a lot of that from Kansas State this week. Mix it up as far as our formations and personnel groups. And if you do that, which they will do, they've been a really good job of doing that over the course of the last 4 or 5 games. If they do that, it'll cause big problems, and then K-State will be able to run the football because you're going to have to match up with those if we bring out 4 receivers. Because if you don't, then K-State, they'll be able to pick them apart. I mean, you can't have linebackers out there covering slot guys. That's not going to work.
The whole world's focused on DJ Giddens, excuse me, on DJ Giddens in this game. And Big B, I just kind of feel like Dylan Edwards
Yeah.
is going to be a problem in this game. As a
Yeah.
Kansas kid, this game probably means a lot to him. But I feel like his speed against these KU linebackers is a bad mix for the Jayhawks.
Yeah, they're DJ, or excuse me, not DJ, but Dylan is due for a huge breakout game. I know a lot of people thought the Arizona game was, and for all intents and purposes, you could say that. But I think this might be another avenue where he breaks out. Again, I talked about matchups. Put him and DJ in the backfield at the same time, motion him out, get a wide receiver and just run a wheel route or an arrow route like we saw DJ run last week against West Virginia on a catch. Look, if they're going to do that and they're going to try to match up one-on-one with a linebacker with Dylan Edwards, K-State has to take that matchup every single time and to just exploit it. So
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to see a lot of stuff maybe we haven't been able to see because of injury, especially against Colorado and then West Virginia. I think there's still more in the bag that K-State has on the offense.
Does K-State get this done for number 16?
I think they do. I think they control the line of scrimmage on both sides. I think they're able to run it when they want to, which is always key. Run it when you want to run it and run it when you have to run it. K-State will be able to do that. KU won't. And that will be the difference in the football game, I believe. And the thing about KU is when they can't run it when they can't run it when they want to, they throw it. Jalen Daniels has had a propensity to throw interceptions this year. K-State just got to catch them when they come. So I think K-State wins.
Now you see why he's one of our football analysts at GoPowercat. Mr. Brien Hanley, host of the Big 12 Insiders, and of course helps us out quite a bit with GoPowercat stuff, including yesterday on the podcast. Thank you for filling in for Gilbert. He's a lazy bum. He really is. We'll have Ryan Gilbert at the end of the show to talk about some of the betting odds. And after this break on the Big 12 Insiders, sponsored by Weddle and Sons Roofing, we'll have Ryan Wallace to dive into the KU Jayhawks a little bit deeper right here on the Powercat Pregame Podcast.
It's time to take a break for our sponsors. We'll be back with more from GoPowercat.com.
Weddle and Sons Roofing. Protecting homes, businesses, and providing peace of mind for more than 25 years. Weddle and Sons is your Tesla solar roofing outlet.
Now let's head back to the show for more K-State sports coverage from GoPowercat.com.
Welcome back to the Powercat Pregame Podcast, sponsored by our friends at Weddle and Sons Roofing. And now let's move into the KU breakdown with our analyst Ryan Wallace, who handles such things, does a good job of scoping out the opposing team. And this one's easy for you, Wally, because you're familiar with a lot of the dudes on this team, as well as being a rival. You stay in touch with them in sharing a media market. So give me your overall thoughts on KU season and what they bring to the table on Saturday night at the Bill.
Well, I mean, out of the gate, this is probably not what K-State fans want to hear, and they can disregard my beliefs here, but there's a sense of worry for me in this game, and not necessarily that KU's the better team, that K-State will lose, but it seems to be kind of a perfect storm for KU entering this week because they have some momentum coming out of Houston and a recent bye week where they were able to kind of get themselves together, it would appear. But I think more importantly, I don't think there's as much pressure on them in this game. The game last year, there was a lot riding on it. Obviously, there were some injuries that, really struck them at positions that they, couldn't afford them. And yet they still played with K-State. This year, they've got everybody back. But, it seems like parts of their fan base, parts of maybe the K-State fan base, the Big 12 fan base in general, has kind of written KU off. Yeah. And they're playing with house money right now. And I think that on top of the fact that they're really not as bad as their record shows, I think situationally there are areas, and we'll get to them, where they really seem to struggle. But overall, I mean, you go to the PFF grades, and I'm not huge on PFF, but overall, you can kind of take some of what they do and kind of put it in a capsule and try and give you an idea of teams. They rank KU higher than K-State overall. 89.8 to K-State's 84.2. And so, overall, getting back to the core of your question, Fitz, I think that, They're, again, a team that's better than their record, that in some ways offensively similarly to K-State needed some time to kind of find their identity and figure out what works and what doesn't. And then defensively, maybe kind of a little bit of the same, figuring out where they are strong, where they are weak, and how they can kind of combat those, and getting some guys healthy at the right time. This will be more the KU team that we expected preseason entering Manhattan this week than I think what we've seen the majority of the season thus far.
I totally agree with everything you just said. Is Devin Neal and his running mate back there the best running backs or combination that K-State has seen so far this season?
I think you could probably make that argument. I mean, there's not one that, jumps off the page to me, running through the memory book here. I think it's interesting, though, that, Daniel Highshaw, it sounds like, is questionable at best for this game. In fact, from the KU sides that folks that I've talked to, they're already kind of deeming him as like being out. They're kind of moving forward as if this is going to be Devin Neal's game to take over, and potentially sprinkling in a little bit more Jalen Daniels. When I started to break down some of his numbers, his designed yardage so far this season, it's 50% of his design yards have been against Arizona State and Houston, just in those two games combined for the season. And it's already the second most design yardage runs that he's had in a season in his career. It looks like if they continue to use him the way they have the last two games, will probably eclipse his most designed yardage runs that he's had in his career. And I think we're going to see a little bit more of that in Manhattan. If Jeff Grimes has it his way, he wants his quarterbacks to be dual threat. I mean, you think about what he did at BYU. Zach Wilson had kind of that arm, but he could move the chains when he needed to. Jerry Bohannon, the year that Baylor won the Big 12 championship, he had that threat. Guys, quarterbacks that maybe weren't very polished at times. You could say that about Jalen Daniels, but still had that threat that you had to be honest if you're a defense. And we're starting to see them use a little bit more of that, starting to see more of that play action that works well for Jalen Daniels. And in saying all of that, it's opened up the deep ball for Jalen Daniels. And again, accuracy wise, there's a little Garrett Green to him, right? Fitz, like he'll kind of throw it in tight windows, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So there's kind of that YOLO, element to Jalen Daniels' game that I think KU fans, pull their hair out with. But again, we're starting to see him kind of shake some of that rust off that I do believe was there. And we're starting to see him and Jeff Grimes go, okay, this works, this doesn't. And again, I think everything starts with the run game. If they can get more of you to bite on that play action, more of Devin Neal, more of Jalen Daniels' feet, they're going to start stretching that field. And that's where Quentin Skinner, Lawrence Arnold is a guy that I think has been tremendous the last couple of games, who has been, I don't want to say non-existent early on in the season, but the more they get LJ Arnold going, the more they get Quentin Skinner going, that makes, a guy like Luke Grimm that much better. That makes Jalen Daniels that much better. And that makes big gaps for a guy like Devin Neal.
And they love their tight ends too.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a diversity of this offense that has returned. It kind of reminds you of K-State earlier in the season when they were a little gun shy about running Avery Johnson. I think KU was protective of Jalen Daniels in his back. And now as we've gotten halfway plus through the season, they've decided, okay, we got to let him play because this ain't working. And I think it's a good move. The quarterback run game strikes me is going to be a huge aspect on both sides of this.
Right.
You got to be able to run it with your quarterback, but you better be able to stop it with your defense because both quarterbacks can run wild on you.
Well, and I think that, like you said, that'll be kind of the interesting point early on, is to see how Brian Borland, who I kind of compare to Tom Hayes, and that's, kind of a compliment, kind of not, but how he decides to handle Avery Johnson, just in the same fashion as how does Joe Klanderman decide to handle Jalen Daniels. Because when you break down Jalen Daniels, again, you go to PFF a little bit, so take this with a grain of salt, but his NFL passer rating under pressure this year, Fitz, is 26.2. Over the course of his career, it's only 73.4. So there's a history there that shows you Jalen doesn't really handle pressure very well.
Yeah.
when he's kept clean, he's a 93.3 NFL passer rating and 109.8 over the course of his career. You give him a pocket, he can kill you. So to me, if you're K-State, I think that this is an offensive line that I think in pass pro has been fairly good, but the interior to me seems susceptible for a little bit added push if you wanted to, whether it's bring a blitz, whether it's, kind of pressure up the middle a little bit more. I think it's there. Logan Brown, the former 5-star tackle that they got from Wisconsin on the right side, has been pretty good. Bryce Cabledew on the other side is adequate, decent enough. In the interior, though, Kobe Baines is a guy that they got from Louisville at right guard that has been kind of problematic at times for them. And he's been the one that they've kind of pulled. It seems like he's gotten substituted out the fastest because he's prone to penalties. He'll have some snaps where he looks great. He has others where he doesn't. And then on the other side, Michael Ford Jr. is kind of hit and miss. And then Bryce Foster in the middle, another former kind of 5-star guy that they got from A&M, is just like the Hulk, but sometimes doesn't play that way. And I think he's had to adjust a little bit. Maybe the fit hasn't been as seamless as I kind of thought it would be, and other KU fans thought it would be. So, whether Joe Klanderman wants to kind of flush Jalen Daniels out of the pocket, maybe, and then you let Desmond Purnell and your safeties come up and hopefully tackle a little bit better in the open field than they did in Morgantown. Or, maybe you just spy him. That'll be interesting. And then on the other side, Fitz, as you mentioned with KU's defense, I'm just going to put it how it is and be blunt about it. Taiwan Berryhill at the middle linebacker spot has been dreadful for them, and I think they know it. Cornell Wheeler, it sounds like, is getting more and more healthy. Played 25 snaps against Houston. I would expect him to play more snaps against K-State. And when that transfer from Michigan is on the field, everything seems to be better for them in run support, in pass support. I think it allows JB Brown, who's kind of been, one of their more electric guys as a pass rusher, similar to Desmond Parnell. You can send him on a blitz and he's very effective. And he's a really good linebacker when he's not asked to kind of keep an eye out of and help Taiwan Berryhill. When Cornell Wheeler's over there, he can just focus on his responsibility, and they're so much better. So, what does Brian Borland decide to do? If it's Taiwan Berryhill out there, do you spy Avery Johnson? Do you pressure him with Tyron Berryhill and JB Brown? If Cornell Wheeler's out there, does that adjust things? I don't know, Fitz. If I'm KU, that's where I'm most nervous because, they haven't seen Avery Johnson. He didn't play in this game last year. And personally, and maybe privately, I think that steamed him a little bit because Will Howard wasn't terrific in Lawrence last year. I think Avery Johnson would have loved to have gotten involved in that game. As a native Kansan, he would have loved to gotten involved in that game. And you can watch tape on Avery Johnson all you want, but the real thing is the real thing. And I think that KU, that's where, again, when I talk about being nervous for this game, and I know I'm rambling here, but that's where I think push comes to shove a little bit for me with saying, I feel better about K-State's defense rising to the occasion as they did last year in Lawrence than I do this KU defense rising to the occasion against somebody as dynamic as Avery Johnson.
Your rambling is my easy day at work, so just feel free. Look, we know that this game means more to Kansas kids. It always has. And you just mentioned a group of guys that are Kansas kids. You got DJ Giddens, you got Avery Johnson, and you got Dylan Edwards, who I feel like is a really bad matchup for this KU defense. I'm interested to see how K-State approaches its running game, because I think KU will try to take it away, but they have more things that they can put on the table with Avery being a running quarterback and back involved in the offense after not running last week. I think this is going to be really troublesome for that KU defense.
Yeah, and I heard you say it accurately on the GoPowercat podcast this week about still kind of wanting K-State to open that playbook a little bit more. I think there's still things there. Obviously the West Virginia game plan, the way that it went, they didn't really have to dig too deep. This one, maybe they do, maybe they don't. We'll see. But I'd like to see them test it a little bit more. And here's why I want to see a little bit more this week is because I mentioned, describing Brian Borland as Tom Hayes. in the sense of, he kind of just wants to play the base. He doesn't want to get overly aggressive. It's that bend, but don't break defense. And that's why KU's defense, second best red zone defense in the Big 12. But they allow a ton of first downs. I mean, only Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, West Virginia, and Arizona. So think about those defenses for a second. Have allowed more first downs than the KU defense this year. But when they get into the red zone, they tighten up. And so as much as we love and respect and believe in the K-State running game, we've seen K-State get tested at times in the red zone. I go back to BYU, and I know that was a road game versus this one being at home, and it's different. But I think, again, when you talk about Dylan Edwards and you talk about some of the more dynamic plays that K-State has shown this season, you would rather them be able to do some of that rather than march down the field like we're kind of accustomed to, get in the red zone and then punch it in. Maybe mix in some of that stuff when you're at the 40-yard line, the 50-yard line, and try and get some big plays there that can get you into the end zone quicker than having to, put KU's back against the wall, which K-State probably wants to do. But again, against this defense, I don't really know if you want to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I remember the Tom Hayes years very well. They were really good when the field got compressed, because that was the days of the spread all over the Big 12. K-State couldn't handle it, but they also kept you out of the end zone and made you drive the field. And then you got in the red zone, and all of a sudden everyone's closer to the line of scrimmage. It got much more difficult. But I'd also see games where K-State had great red zone defense and got trashed because they gave up explosive plays, just as you mentioned. It always looks good when you don't let them score in the red zone, but then you look at the stats. Oh, you had 4 touchdowns of more than 20 yards. So that doesn't count. Special teams always comes into play.
In this game every year, right? Why is that?
I don't know. Last year, KU made a move to improve special teams that didn't work. And one of the plays in that game that kind of changed the texture of the game was Lawrence native Keenan Garber scooping up or catching a blocked extra point and taking it the distance. That just kind of sucked the life out of KU in some ways. I think special teams are going to be big again for Kansas State.
I'm glad you asked about special teams, because I pulled up some stats that I found kind of interesting on the Jayhawks when it comes to special teams. They're the worst kickoff return average in the Big 12. So, we've talked at times on this show about K-State struggling with starting field position. KU pretty much starts with even worse starting field position. I mean, they're used to marching it down the field when they've had to score. What's interesting, though, about kickoff is they're also one of the best kickoff coverage units in the Big 12. So they haven't been able to rack up yards when you're kicking it to them, but they're also holding their opponents when it comes to their kickoff coverage defense. So, I wouldn't expect, granted, Dylan Edwards is Dylan Edwards. I mean, there's enough proven track record of K-State getting some dynamic plays on special teams. And they got the playmakers to do it this year. So I'm not going to count them out, but I also, it's not the game where you're going, okay, we'll chalk up a kickoff return, because they've been pretty good in Lawrence on kickoff return defense. But then again, kind of it swings back into the negative for KU. They're the worst net punting team in the Big 12, 35 yards. So, again, those are areas that K-State has to take advantage. And we talk about every year in rivalry games, you got to kind of find those minute areas to really take advantage of and strike fear in the opponent and again, take advantage of. And I think this year with special teams, that's an area that K-State has to take advantage. If they're going to only punt at 35 yards, then you've got to take advantage of that and do with it what you can out of that great starting field position. So, I think that's definitely an area, once again, as it is every year, that I think K-State holds the advantage. They've got to take the advantage on Saturday night.
Well, I usually ask you how you think this will come out. I'm not going to do that to you, Wally. I don't want to put you in that position unless you're going to say K-State's going to win.
Here's why I do think K-State's going to win. Is my gut feeling on this game is that it might surprise some folks that are K-State fans that maybe haven't watched a ton of KU this year, or they've seen some of the nightmarish kind of ways that they've lost the game, and so they've written them off. I do think it's going to be competitive. It's been competitive each of the past 2 years, and those have been with you could argue, more veteran K-State teams than the one that they're going to put out on the field against KU on Saturday. I think KU's probably got more guys that have played valuable minutes in this series on Saturday than what K-State will put out on the field. And there's a part of me that thinks that does, hold an advantage for KU, that they might not play as tight right out of the gate. But where the history for me, where I kind of side with K-State, not only with it being a home game, but for the 5 losses this year with KU, they've held a fourth quarter lead and they've managed to squander it. And they're 1-18 when they haven't had the lead in the fourth quarter under Lance Leipold. They kind of just get to the end of games, Fitz, and they haven't found ways. And with K-State, even at times this year, this team has found ways. They just kind of keep their head to the grindstone and keep grinding. And with KU, another stat that was alarming to me, 46 of 56 points scored by Big 12 opponents in the second half against KU have been scored in the fourth quarter. 46 of 56 points in second half games against Big 12 opponents have been scored in the fourth quarter. They just, it's a hard thing for Lance Leipold to break, that kind of culture of until you do it. And again, when you've got history that sides so long with K-State in this one, even if you're playing with house money, there's that element when you get into that crunch time that KU starts to think about all the ways they've lost games before. And K-State can kind of harken back to the ways that they've won those games before. And that's where I think, as competitive and maybe as challenging as it may be on Saturday night, I still see K-State getting the dub.
I agree. One more topic before I let you go, because this is the in-state rivalry. It's a huge recruiting weekend for Kansas State. And while you'll have tons of coverage of that visiting and all those visits and players and who's there and what they said, probably behind our paywall at GoPowercat, this is a significant game for K-State, Taylor Bratt's Super Bowl, because he loves to own the state of Kansas as a recruiter. And it's going to be another busy weekend.
Well, and I'll be quick with this, but they've got a ton of commits from the 2025 class that will be there, and so it's a chance for them to kind of solidify things there with anybody that might be getting poached by other teams. We've kind of gone over that narrative, I think, although I still think things are very solid for K-State in that regard, but it never hurts. But they've also got a 2025 official visitor that, again, you can see on GoPowercat that's not behind the paywall. If you drop down our official visits, I mean, it's been talked about for a number of months. Darian Whitaker Jr. out of out of Omaha, Nebraska, a talented linebacker that I've kind of compared to Asen Newsome. Would be a huge get, I think, for them this late in the process. His star rating isn't absurd, but what I was able to see him do at K-State camp was absurd, and he would be really good in this defense. And then the 2026 class, Fitz, I think KU has set themselves up to be as in good a shape with the next cycle's in-state guys as they've been under Lance Leipold. A number of them are going to be there. And so they're going to be not only, guests of K-State, but kind of putting these two teams up against one another in person. And Ian Premer is one of those guys, the number one prospect in the state. Hunter Higgins will be there from Maize South, a guy that I saw against Derby last Friday night. All big-time names, big-time prospects in the class for next year. It's a big kind of barometer game for those kids to start to gauge, are you truly feeling, what KU's selling? Or are you truly feeling what K-State has to offer? Big time atmosphere and opportunity for K-State with those junior the game on Saturday night.
He's Ryan Wallace. He covers recruiting for us and breaks down opponents. So this was like the dream segment. This was his absolute wheelhouse of coverage for GoPowercat. Wally, appreciate it very much. And we will be back on the other side. One more break to go, and then the three wise men appear. Chris Kleiman, Avery Johnson, and Ryan Gilbert. Gills will join us to talk about some of the betting odds in this game between K-State and KU after this break on the Powercat Pregame Podcast, sponsored by Weddle & Sons Roofing.
It's time to take a break for our sponsors. We'll be back with more from GoPowercat.com.
Weddle & Sons Roofing. protecting homes, businesses, and providing peace of mind for more than 25 years. Weddle & Sons is your Tesla solar roofing outlet.
Now let's head back to the show for more K-State sports coverage from GoPowercat.com.
This week we fortunate to get to play at home. Another night game gives us an opportunity to get our bodies back and get our minds fresh with the extra time we have on Friday and Saturday. And we're going to need that extra time on Friday and Saturday. They do a lot of different things, as they always have, especially offensively. They're really creative in what they do offensively with shift trade motions. They've got a lot of talented guys on both sides of the ball. And so we've got to come up with really good plans and then spend some time and execute it and make sure that we know our assignments and can play fast.
Coach, you had some issues with the quarterback run game on Saturday. Now you get Jalen Daniels, a real dual threat. What are your thoughts on that?
We didn't tackle well. That's the biggest thing. And, I know that Daniels is bigger than Green and has hurt us rushing the football. I know he did in 22 hurt us rushing the football. I went back and watched that game yesterday. So we've got to tackle better and we've got to keep leverage better. Those were the two main issues that we had. Was the fact that we were playing man and there was one guy left sometimes to make the tackle and Green was sometimes making that guy miss, or the fact that we didn't have great rush lanes and he'd sneak out. And it's a big factor, something that concerns us. He's a really talented kid and I'm glad for him that he's healthy and gotten an opportunity to play, because I know that he's missed some time. Terrific talent and obviously a real big leader on their team.
Kansas has some fairly elite players on the back end of that defense. What concerns you the most? What do they do well?
They go attack the ball, especially those corners. Those corners have played a lot of football. That's the thing. You look up and down the roster. There's guys on both sides of the ball that have played a lot of football for both teams. And I know how important this game is for both schools and for both teams. It's turning into a great rivalry. The last few years have been really competitive games, and we've found a way. Last year we were down 11 in the second half and found a way. Once again, there's so many. I watched the game in 2022, like I said yesterday, and you see a lot of the same faces and a lot of the same names. And the positive thing is you see a lot of the same guys for us too. And so both veteran group of guys, you can throw the records out. You can do all it. Doesn't matter what anybody's done last week, a month ago, a year ago. Man, it's going to be a great football game Saturday night.
Okay, we're going to try this again. Compare how you feel physically this week to last week.
A lot better. Feel pretty good.
Again, I asked you after the game about the offensive line, but that had to be fun just to operate like that and not have to worry.
Being able to sit in there and just dissect West Virginia's defense and not have to worry about anything and those guys, taking care of me. It was a great feeling, and just credit to those guys for the work and preparation they put in during the week last week.
First start in a game against Kansas. What's this mean to the locker room?
I think the biggest thing is not overhyping it and just treating it like each and every week. Obviously, it's a big rivalry game. We're going to get KU's best, and we're going to go out on the field and put our best out there on display. So attacking it preparing like every other week, but obviously this one means a little bit more to us.
That was Kansas State coach Chris Kleiman and quarterback Avery Johnson on Monday leading up to this game. And now we bring in Ryan Gilbert to kind of wrap things up with us as we talk about some of the odds on this Kansas State KU game, including the spread, the over-under, and also any props out there that he likes. Fresh back from Kansas City and covering Big 12 Media Days. He's a man for all seasons. It's Ryan Gilbert.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just got back. I was listening to the Questions podcast. It's really nice when that Ryan Gilbert's not on that show. So keep that up, Fitz.
Ratings went way up. The spread as we record this is 9.5 for the home team, Kansas State. Where do you sit on that? Will that be a cover for K-State, meaning winning by 10 points or more, or will KU either cover that spread or end up winning. What do you say?
We've talked a lot about this. Kansas is a much better team than its record would show. So I'll keep this pretty short and sweet with the spread. I think this will be a single-digit game without a doubt. And that's not a knock on Kansas State, but coming off back-to-back road games, anybody that saw me on Monday night on the live stream knows how tiring and physically exhausting it was for me. But I wasn't doing anything, physically degrading rather on the football field, right? Whereas these guys are getting back at 5 a.m. and they're getting beat up. So Kansas is coming off of a bye week and a home game. K-State's been traveling to two opposite ends of the country its last 2 weeks. And so add in the fact that this Kansas team is hungry. They've got something to prove, and they're better than a 2-5 team has ever been. This should be a much closer game than 9.5. I really do I hate to say it, but I love Kansas on the spread.
Well, if Kansas on the spread, do you think K-State wins, even though it doesn't cover?
I would be surprised if K-State loses just because
Yeah.
Chris Kleiman's really making it an emphasis. Fitz, I know you asked him on Monday. I forget how you phrased your question, but it was about the rivalry, and Kleiman just kind of shot it down. Like, yeah, this is just any other game for us. So K-State should be locked in.
Okay, so Vegas, I think we're using FanDuel here, has the over-under at 55.5 points. You like the under?
I do. And I said this with the West Virginia game, and it's kind of this, I'll echo the same words. Both teams like to run the football. You look at Kansas State and Kansas, they're almost identical. They have a lead back, DJ Giddens and Devin Neal. And then you've got kind of a 1-2 punch with Dylan Edwards and Highshaw for the Jayhawks. And then a mobile quarterback. Avery Johnson and Jalen Daniels are capable of doing some damage with their legs. So, they're going to chew up clock. They're going to run the football, control the time of possession. That always favors an under.
Okay, well, that sounds logical. Now let's get into some of those props. Avery Johnson did not run the ball last week. They had him pretty much shut down. It was a successful operation. They kept him healthy. He didn't get hit. And now we expect him to get back to running the ball. How do you think that'll work out for Avery?
Yeah, you guys talked about this on the Questions podcast, and on my way up here, right? You guys were talking about Avery getting back to running the football, and he's had really 14 days. It'll be at the time of the game where he hasn't been tackled once, is what Cole mentioned. And so, I think these numbers are really kind of skewed. 50 yards or more is plus 148, and 100 or more is plus 640, and 125 is plus 1200. So I wouldn't be scared at all of what we saw in Morgantown. Everybody knows they were trying to keep him healthy, preserve him. Whether they wanted to keep his hip or whatever it was, they're not going to do that again against Kansas. Avery Johnson's going to get back to running the football. He's the type of player that, while he performed well in Morgantown with his arm, he's the type of player that likes to get hit, get banged up, get him into the flow of the game. Fitz, I don't know if you can see this fly coming around me, but we'll have to ignore that. If your dogs were here, they would be on that duty for
I
sure.
hope they don't see it on the screen.
Oh, I know, right? Or you don't sneeze. Anyway, yeah, this is a game for Avery Johnson to kind of get back onto the ground and kind of he got fresh legs after that game in Morgantown. So I love anything. If you're feeling frisky, 125 yards, 50 yards, 25 yards, there's great value up and down the line.
Yep, I would agree with all that. Also, the only running back in this game is not named DJ Giddens. Devin Neal from KU is also very productive. He's under his numbers from the past, but that's been pretty much what this offense has done so far this season for KU. But they seem to be finding themselves, and that probably includes Neal having better success running. What do you think would be a wise bet if you're thinking Devin Neal?
Anytime touchdown score. And this is a Lawrence native. So this is one of those games that, of course, means a lot to him. And Fitz, we saw it in Morgantown. These coaches, it's not just Kansas State. When DJ Giddens had that long pass and he gets brought down at the 1, what are the next 2 plays? It's a run play. And of course he didn't score, but they want to reward those guys with touchdowns. They got Dylan Edwards a score in the Colorado game. I assume Kansas's staff is going to try to do something similar with Devin Neal, minus 150 for him to get into the end zone. If you want to get frisky, plus 550 for the first touchdown. But as a Kansas kid, I think Lance Leipold and co are going to try to get Neal into the end zone. And I kind of thought the same thing with DJ Giddens as a Junction City guy. There goes the fly again. But it's minus 290. And so that's just not great value. DJ Giddens has been awesome this year, man. Don't get it wrong. but he has not found the end zone enough. And so that's maybe the one knock with Giddens. So I'd stay away from Giddens, but I think it's more true for Devin Neal as the Kansas got to find the end zone here.
Makes a lot of sense. Anything else that jumps out at you?
One more, yeah, before we're ending here. Jalen Daniels, I couldn't find one on FanDuel or DraftKings to throw an interception. I know I said earlier that this is going to be a game where both teams try to run the football and establish that rushing attack. But, let's be real here. I've said that Kansas is going to cover. I said it'll be a closer game and all that stuff. But Kansas State is the better football team. And if Kansas State can build a lead, right, Kansas State should, as it's favored by 10 points. Vegas obviously knows something. Kansas might get behind in this game. Jalen Daniels, why is Kansas 2-5? It's because Daniels has thrown 8 interceptions on the year. He's also lost a couple fumbles at very costly, timely, costly opportunities for KU to put teams away. And KU secondary has not been perfect. They haven't been able to shut the door at the end of games, but Daniels is the guy that, and that's what Lance Leipold and his staff will do. They're going to tell him this is what I would do if I was that staff. The best chance for Kansas to win this game is to go out and be aggressive. Yeah, you might throw an interception and lose it, but as sort of the underdog on the road in a rivalry, you have to take your chances, try to hit those home runs. It might pay off for KU, but I can certainly see a couple of plays where K-State's secondary, despite the ability to give up the home run big play, I think they can get some interceptions on Daniels.
Very good, my friend. Good stuff. Welcome back to Manhattan. I'll get to work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan Gilbert, for making time on a busy day as you split your services between football and basketball for GoPowercat, and finish off this preview of K-State and KU at Bill Snyder Family Stadium on Saturday night. Kick at 7. Game is being shown on ESPN2. And if you're there, you're going to see a whale of an environment. This could be a really entertaining game, and the crowd will be stoked. I think K-State wins this game. I've had some real concerns about this game going into it, leading up to it. But what happened last week in Morgantown with Avery Johnson proving that if you want to just try to take him and DJ Giddens and Dylan Edwards away, you're going to pay a price for that. I think that makes K-State the easy favorite in this, although KU is so much better than what that record says. They're dangerous, and they could pose a big threat to K-State in this game. It'll be really important for K-State to get out of the gate early, apply some pressure, and make KU play from behind, because they are less equipped to do that. And when they don't lead in the second half, well, they almost always lose. K-State and KU at the Bill. It's going to be a great night of college football as two programs that now equally value this game between Chris Kleiman and Lance Leipold, the two head coaches. They'll tangle for one more time. K-State's won 15 in a row. Will it be 16? Well, I'll see you at the Bill, and we'll find out together.
Thank you for watching GoPowercat.com's Powercat Pregame Podcast, sponsored by Weddle & Sons Roofing. This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production.